Awesome. And I will be posting this recording for folks who couldn't attend, hopefully in like the next week. It's not as speedy about as I'd like to be, but officially, now that the recording has begun, welcome everybody to tonight's recruitment event, Building Progressive Leaders Across New Hampshire and the Country. That's my kind of off the cuff title, but I'm really excited to be talking with each of you, and I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves. Sam, do you want to go first and just share a bit about who you are, what you do, and maybe a brief snippet about how your week's been going so far on day one?
Okay. Hi, everyone. Sam Hammond, he, him, his, from Nashua. I currently work in nonprofit management with a background in policy research and advocacy. And my day's been going well, actually. Yeah, I feel like a kid who's just like excited that it's summer, even though that means like nothing to me as an adult working, but still excited.
Awesome, I love it. And let's popcorn over to Megan.
Hello, everyone. My name is Megan Hoskins, she, her pronouns. I live in Manchester, New Hampshire, and I am currently field organizer with Climate Action New Hampshire, a project of the League of Conservation Voters. We do a lot of work around climate action and clean energy. And my day has been pretty good so far.
Awesome. And Eddie, round us out.
Hi, my name is Eddie Gomez, and I live in Peterborough, New Hampshire. I'm a videographer. I have a video production business called Drum, which mostly does work with small businesses and nonprofits. I was part of the 2020 cohort, and I'm currently the co-communications chair. And then what was like how the week is going? Is that?
Yeah, day one. How are you feeling so far?
Pretty good. My friend and Emma's friend were in town for like 5 days, and we live in a 1-bedroom, and it was like super condensed. But it was super cool to hang out with them, and I surprisingly feel really well after like hosting for 5 days and stuff. Yeah, I guess so pretty good, I guess. Oh, and I just started my ballet 4 dance class, which was freaking rigorous. It's gonna be super tough to do, so that was interesting. But yeah.
All right. Well, maybe you can teach us some moves after a couple more classes.
Little tombe, little pas de bourrée.
Exactly.
I'm realizing that I forgot a couple things. I am a 2020 NLC alumni.
You accidentally put yourself on mute, Megan. We heard your
Thank you. And I'm the advancement chair for this year, this coming 2 years.
Thank you. And you know what, Sam, I didn't actually ask you all to say what your fellowship class was, but Sam, will you just say what year you were as well?
I was 2018.
Awesome. So Sam was an early bird. Talk about the history of NLC nationally and here in New Hampshire a little bit later. But let's launch into some questions for the three of you. There's lots of alumni who are here today, and hopefully since you've been nominated by an alumni, since you received my invitation and are here tonight, if you're thinking about applying, you can chat with those people. If you're not sure who that person is, let me know and I'll put you in touch with them too. But Megan, Sam, and Eddie, I would love just to kind of kick off the rounds of questions with a brief recap of what led you to originally applying for NLC, maybe a bit of a story about where you were at and what made you decide to, press the application button at the end.
All right, this is Sam. So I was someone who had moved to New Hampshire from Massachusetts, and in Massachusetts, I was at the time much more connected with the progressive and activist scene, moved because of a job offer. And then once I was in New Hampshire, I feel like I was someone who was just kind of like a little stagnant in a lot of my professional and personal life, just trying to figure out how to actually get connected with a community here in New Hampshire, and then also just struggling to basically take a lot of my passions just to the next level. And it was really a friend of a friend who I had barely met at one time just sent me a text one day saying, have you heard about this program? And I nodded, and he gave me like a very brief, like one sentence text encouraging me to apply, and I applied. And it's been a very major part of my life for the past 3 years.
Eddie or Megan, feel free to take, oh, I see Megan come off mute.
It's Megan. Yeah, so when I applied, I had just recently started my position with Climate Action New Hampshire. A little background, I'm originally from Indiana. I moved to New Hampshire in 2015 for grad school. I went to Antioch University, New England. It's over in Keene, kind of hidden away over there. But when I moved to New Hampshire, one of my friends, and he ended up being a supervisor. I did a community fellowship with Next Gen Climate. It was Next Gen Climate then, it's Next Gen New Hampshire now, in the youth movement too. Anyway, I remember him being a part of it, and then just like knowing so many people who had been a part of NLC in some way, just like throughout my career here in New Hampshire. I worked in campaigns for a while, and technically still working campaigns, just a little different. But yeah, just like so many people that I had known had been in NLC and like in kind of like shared their good experience about it with me. And I had some people encourage me to apply. And thankfully my job has been very welcoming of it, and like one of my supervisors kind of helped me along in the process in terms of like helping me with the application fee, which was really nice. But yeah, I guess that's kind of where I was at.
Awesome, thanks, Megan. Eddie, do you want to chime in?
Yeah. So I'm from San Antonio, Texas. I moved here in 2014. Long story. I never thought I'd see myself in New Hampshire, but my partner Emma, she did the 2019 cohort, and she was like, "Oh, I got accepted to NLC," and I was like, "Cool." I don't know what that is. I had not heard about it, but she was telling me, I was like, oh, that sounds cool. Like I was like, just talking about like the different institute weekends. And then she was like, hey, we're actually like trying to do this fundraiser video. Like, would you do me a solid and create a video for us? And I was like, okay. So I went to one of the institutes for like an hour or so, and just like did some fly on the wall filming, and kind of like heard conversations and the people that were in the room. And I was like, holy moly, like there's like a lot of cool people doing really cool things here. Like, holy F. And you know, so she encouraged me to apply. And at the time that I was applying, I was meeting people in my community because of my business. So I was like meeting like, you know, business owners and nonprofit directors, but really it was like, everyone I knew was like over the age of 45. So that was kind of, yeah, it wasn't a lot of people like in my age group. And then like meeting the people in her cohort, I was like, all right, there's like actually young people doing really awesome things. And I guess also because I live like in a rural part of the state, that's also like a barrier. I would imagine like living in Manchester, the Seacoast, or Nashua, or Concord even, that it's a little bit easier to meet people, I would imagine. But you know, like I was going to like my library book club to meet people and things like, and so, yeah. So she had encouraged me to apply, and yeah, it was a great experience. And wait, what was the other questions? What made me apply? Where was I? Is that about the gist?
That was about the gist. Yeah, you did.
Okay.
You all did.
All right, cool.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. You know, I think that one of the reasons that I ask this question first. And if you attend future sessions with Kat and I over the rest of the summer, this will often be one of the ones we hit off because chronologically it makes sense, but also it's a good way of thinking that people come into NLC from all these different walks of life and kind of different points in their life. But like Eddie said, you know, and Megan and Sam, it becomes a kind of unifying factor that it brings people together and people who share common values and can unify around deciding what it means to be a progressive, which is a pretty broad term here in New Hampshire, and developing around that. So there's a lot of really powerful elements that we'll talk a bit more about through some of these questions and throughout the rest of the meeting. So my next question, team, is once you were accepted and the Institute was set to begin in January, was there any specific training or element of the Institute that you felt was really high impact for your personal or professional development? I'm not going to pick people to go in any particular order. You can feel free to. Oh, Sam came off mute. Excellent.
Yeah, and in short, the answer is yes. It's going to be difficult to pick one session because NLC is there's a lot to it, but one of the key components is a 6 months institute, like really gears to give people personal and professional development, and that can be fundraising, communications, organizational work, and management skills. I think to me, the thing that like makes NLC really special is that it takes a very holistic approach to people, because it's not just someone's professional skills. It's really looking at your life, coming up with your goals for your life in general, focusing on what are your internal values and what are your skills and kind of where that best can be maximized in a way that's just good for you as a human being, not just what's going to make you the best organizer, the best politician, or the best nonprofit employee. So I feel like that, and just having a space, especially the first weekend, where you really take stock of your life story, what are the experiences you've had, how that shaped your values, and kind of how that makes you the person you are. That's not something that I'd ever really been taught to think about in other professional settings. And I think that's something that's really just shaped my entire worldview moving forward.
We're going to talk a lot about that, Sam.
I guess I'll pop in here next. So yeah, kind of like jumping off on what Sam said, like, you know, like the first weekend, like the self-analysis, and I won't give away too much, but like it takes a good reflection of like who you are and what your values are. So that way, and it kind of reminds me of like the Moana quotes, like to know where you're going, you have to like know where you've been. Not the hugest impact on me, but I think that's something that I didn't see at the time that later came into like a light was around like fundraising and campaign management. Like I never thought I was going to run for office or anything like that. That wasn't on my agenda or like my trajectory. And so like during the weekend where we're talking about like how to run for office and like how to fundraise for that and like the different steps, I was like, okay, you know, it's like in the business sense, I was like, okay, this is just like, you know, a project management kind of, you know, but going on to like the networking of people that you're like input with NLC. So I was in my town, there was like our town clerk was not the customer service aspect of the job was not being fulfilled quite adequately, I guess is the most political way I can say that. And so it led me to run. And I was like, I don't know, but you know, someone in the cohort a previous year, his name's Manny, who's now the what is it, the president of the NHY, the Young Dems.
Yeah.
Like reached out and we're talking and he was like, oh, he's like, you know, we can running under like a Democrat progressive title could have access to, you know, different elements within that system, whether it be like lists or phone bank lists or things like that, or like a volunteer network, or even just like knowing resources of how to print signs and things like that. So I was like, you know, this whole network that I would have never been like introduced to or have like, I was through NLC. So I thought that was like really cool. I didn't end up winning. She was a 12-year incumbent. So, you know, it was, but I was about 360 votes away from my, my win number. which I thought was pretty good. And so especially for my first time running for something. So yeah, I would say like, even though there are certain aspects that either you might really know about, or on the other end, not know much about, you can still take something out of each and every weekend that comes to you. And especially like on some stuff that you're more knowledgeable about, it's like cool to help other fellows of like your perspective on those things. And then also hear that from other ones who are more versed in a specific area. So I thought, I don't know if that's kind of all over the place, but yeah.
I thought that was great.
Yeah, so similar to what Sam and Eddie said, the first weekend's like really good to kind of like center yourself and like prepare yourself for the Institute. And I think for me, the political fundraising training was like really helpful, even though like I have a background in fundraising, like it was still super helpful to like continue honing my skills. And yeah, it's similar though to what they were saying, like each weekend kind of has like its own benefits. And yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
Could I piggyback on something that Megan said?
Yes.
So like she was saying, like, like how the fundraising was helpful, even coming from that background. I feel like when I translate it to like a business setting of like asking for a hard number, or like knowing, or like the amount that you want to get from someone, but then translating that to like, doing like a sales transaction, I felt like there was like a lot of parallels. So I thought that was a way that you can take something from a weekend and like translate it to something else, another aspect of whatever your background is.
Yeah, thanks, Eddie and Megan and Sam. Those were all really awesome answers. I don't want to take over like by sharing my own story, but I think that you all touched on some really incredible things that are just worth noting. Each of you kind of briefly mentioned that our first weekend is called Lead Weekend, and it's all centered around self-reflection, actualization with like a real lens around diversity, equity, and inclusion, where you reflect not just on your own identity, but also on like how that identity has shaped your experience in the world. And you also use that time to then determine how you can be a better progressive in the spaces that you naturally take up for other people. And you also set long-term and short-term goals for yourself throughout the rest of the fellowship. And also kind of moving forward in the long-term sense of what you want to do as a progressive here in New Hampshire. And then every subsequent theme, and I'll probably mention some of this again in my own spiel towards the end, but every subsequent theme kind of builds on that with the skills that you can use in the area that you're personal and passionate about. So whether that's fundraising, and you're going to use that for a business perspective like Eddie may, or like Megan is doing from issues-based campaigning, there's a lot of really important lessons that are transferable and kind of broad in nature that you can take to mean what you want it to mean. And another real quick thing that Eddie mentioned that I thought was really powerful was there are going to be Institute weekends that you are really confident and comfortable with, probably, or more so than others. And then you might be the expert in the room who gets to help with the guest speakers and the curriculum chairs to lead in that space and really help your fellows to feel comfortable and confident. And then there is also this opportunity where you'll have that, learner perspective, and people will be able to help you. The network and the support that you get really through that kind of like trial by fire first weekend, where you do a lot of self-reflection and goal sharing as a cohort. You get bonded together in a strong and purposeful way. That's really powerful. And I think that kind of does lead me naturally to my next question, because our network is a younger one in the grand scheme of American history, but we are also really a pretty strong network. Our alumni chair wasn't able to make it here today, but Sierran and Rachel and Sam, and I guess now myself, I've been an alumni for a couple of years, and Megan and Eddie, and Kat now too, who is our newest alum in the room. They have all had this opportunity to grow and build with the network. So I'd be curious, is there any good stories? You don't all have to answer if you don't have one, but are there any good stories that you have where you feel like the network has come in handy, or where you feel like you've really just benefited from having a progressive network here in New Hampshire for one reason or another through NLC? I have a couple, so no pressure on the speakers.
The answer is yes. I'm just trying to think of examples. And probably the most sincere, genuine answer right now is just that I have so many more friends and people I just hang out with on like a social level than I ever did before in New Hampshire. I think also for a lot of people, and the New Hampshire political scene is a very like small insular community where it feels like everyone knows each other. And like if you don't know anyone, it's sometimes hard to get your foot in the door. And since NLC, and especially since being in it a few years, I feel like whenever I go to any type of rally, any like Young Dems meeting, any non-profit mixer, I already know like 2 or 3 people there. And like it's a pretty supportive group. So, because I did curriculum for NLC for the past 2 years. So whenever like I can cold call a major organization and say like, oh, I'm from NLC in New Hampshire, like, can you help me out with something? And people already know someone, have heard a good story of us. Yeah, plus like I follow like a lot of people, or like know people from NLC like on Twitter and Facebook. And I get like so many updates on like what's actually happening in New Hampshire, like what the political causes are, or like what people are working on already. And so, yeah, it's just cool just knowing people in the community a lot more than I ever would have before.
Thanks, Sam.
Yeah. Yeah, just to piggyback off of something Sam said about like, having a bigger like range of friends and more people to follow on Twitter and stuff like that. The lead weekend instructors from our lead weekend were just fabulous, and we like stay in touch on Facebook and stuff, which is nice. And one thing that kind of immediately came to my mind is that it's nice to have like a network of fellow progressives in New Hampshire, especially for like my climate action work. It's nice to know that like if I call this person, yeah, they're probably most definitely gonna be like, yeah, I'll sign your petition, or sure, I'll send your letter, which is like nice. But yeah, also just to have the opportunity to like be on the board. Like I was asked to, if I was interested in being on the board, and I would say that's another benefit of after the institute and being an alumni.
One I already mentioned about the campaign running and being in touch with like sign printers and VPN phone banks and lists and things like that. On a kind of a more smaller kind of random scale, I was thinking about like what it would be like to get an intern for my business, but didn't really know where to start. And someone in my cohort was like, hey, I have this like intern document, if you want to like look over, these are kind of things like expectations and stuff and protocols. And it was like a great like foundation to really look into what that would entail. I didn't end up going and getting an intern after all, because I was like, oh, this kind of seems like a lot. But it's not completely off the table. Definitely like maybe when the business matures a little bit more. But it was just a great resource, and like offhanded, they're like, oh yeah, I'll forward that to you or whatever. So it's cool for like even like small things like that.
I lost my mouse for a second, you all know how that feels. I really appreciate all of your stories, again, and not to take up too much time with my own stories, but through NLC, like Megan and Sam and Eddie, I have had, some really awesome opportunities to learn how to fundraise and become a better leader myself. But one of the things that I like Sam mentioned, I think originally was the network was really powerful, was to then leverage my efforts to support other people's important progressive work. A couple that come to mind. I live on the seacoast. I live in Durham, but I lived in Portsmouth for years. And Sierra actually is the one who nominated me. And for years and years and years, Sierra has been a really huge leader in Planned Parenthood fundraising across the state. And she organized a bunch of huge fundraisers annually in Portsmouth. And so I participated in those and did, not really as anything more than an attendee, but I got to participate and promote what Sierra was doing, because I was, like Sam said, more in the know. And I've been able to help similarly at people's election campaigns, on some of the issue-based campaigns, that activism groups that NLC alumni are leading. It's been really powerful to make that connection. And I think to the point of it being about friends, there is certainly an element there, because for better or worse, we live in one of the oldest, whitest states in the country. And to be a young progressive here in New Hampshire, it's not that easy wherever we live. I do think Eddie deserves some credit, because I think that living in rural communities might be a little tougher, but I think that it's difficult anywhere in New Hampshire. And having a network of people who are really passionate and active has been a powerful transformative thing for me. I would love to hear from you all a little bit more about your life after NLC. Actually, I'm going to pause that for a second, because I want to hear a bit about your mentorship experience. And I will get more folks who don't know what this means is, feel free to share a little bit, speakers, but I'll share more about what the mentorship experience actually looks like. I would love to hear about how you feel mentorship has helped you, and if you've served as a mentor in an official or unofficial capacity, what that has felt like as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so as one of the components of NLC is that after Institute, every fellow is paired with someone who kind of matches a lot of the values and professional goals and is further along in their professional development to serve as a mentor to the fellow, just to give them life advice, career advice, or a specific skill, depending on what the fellow is looking for. And I was someone who was going through a pretty actually major career shift as I was going through NLC. And it was a time when I was promoted and actually had a lot more responsibility than I ever had before. And it was kind of a time when I was going from doing a lot of work myself to being more managing and delegating responsibilities. And it was a role that I was struggling to find my comfort with. And it's also difficult because if you're kind of struggling to figure something out at work, it's difficult to ask people at work like how you should be doing without feeling like you're kind of setting yourself up there. So I asked for someone who worked in an organization that was based separately from me, just to kind of who had a lot of experience in nonprofit management that I could speak to on a pretty informal basis, just asking for advice. And I received that, and I have got a great fellow or a great mentor who I had a pretty good relationship with and was meeting consistently prior to the pandemic. And then my life got a little busier and crazier, like everyone's did. And that was good because I really just used that for internal life advice and to get someone's perspective who knew me in a certain capacity, but also was able to give me some objectivity outside of work, and kind of gave me some career advice, and was also someone who I could go to and could tell me like, the situation you're describing at work is not good, and kind of pointed out some practices we had that were not healthy for myself. Because it's really sometimes hard to get perspective of your own work environment when you're like so immersed in it. So to me, that's kind of what I use the mentor relationship with for.
Thanks, Sam.
I'm not really the best person to ask this because My mentorship kind of fell through the cracks during the pandemic. And yeah, so I'm sorry.
No, that's totally okay. Yeah, I think it's worth sharing, because we're all human, that when the pandemic hit, and we'll talk a little bit about this too. It's completely fine, Megan. We had to put mentorship on the back burner while Sierra and Rachel and the curriculum chairs kind of pivoted into a virtual space. So Megan was in the 2020 cohort, and life got crazy, and we did, after the fellowship ended, pair most everyone with a mentor, but it was definitely a little bit more complicated for Megan's fellowship class. Absolutely.
I think part of it is that I should have responded to an email you sent me, Dan, so I'm sorry.
Oh, you have no reason to apologize. And well, I'll still help you find a mentor if you want, Megan. It's my favorite part of the Institute, frankly.
Yeah, so I was part of that cohort too, that where mentorship was on the back burner, and I also like responded to Dan a little bit late, but ended up getting paired with someone who was in my similar line of work, but just like 5 to 7 years further down the line. And it was, for me, it was like basically just like a reaffirmation of like, I'm on the right track, I'm in the right trajectory. Very similar obstacles that he had experienced. It was cool to know that like I was on the right track, that I was like going in the right direction. So that was like a big part of my mentorship, was just touching base on similar business stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Eddie. And Kat, I like that you added in the chat. So Kat just finished her fellowship this year, and she just met her mentor for the first time yesterday. That's great. So I want, kind of in the interest of time, I would love to keep asking you all questions for quite a while, but I want to give my pitch in a moment. So my last question to you all is, for the folks who are considering applying to NLC on this call today, or maybe who are listening to the recording, what would you suggest they do in considering their application process, and what words of advice might you offer that maybe I haven't had a chance to ask yet?
I can kick this one off. Yeah. If people are interested in applying, I mean, I would encourage it, obviously. I thought it was a great experience. There's a lot of progressive means a lot of different things. And like, for example, and so it's like, I think it's okay to have a very wide range of perspectives going into it. Like, I know one of my kind of questions during like my interview was to give an example of my, progressive viewpoint, which, that seems like a very logical question to ask. And I was talking to kind of about how actually some of my viewpoints could fall under like a slight conservativeness, but the end result would be the same, which is interesting. For example, like my dad worked for Time Warner for a long time, or Spectrum, and they were doing like this research on healthcare, and like, oh, if preventative measures in healthcare are implemented, your workers lose less days of work, are more productive and happy. And so like, it was like this like kind of like capitalistic mindset of a push for way much better healthcare that did preventive measures and like just all encompassing. And so like things like that I thought were interesting. Like I was like, oh, I don't know if I like fit in ish, but I was like, oh, well, this kind of viewpoint, I'm told, I think universal healthcare is, something that's needed, because I think people are more productive and more happy and will be able to live up to their potential more. So I think just like not being afraid of pushing the envelope of what it means to be progressive. Because now as the program is getting bigger, with more applicants and things like that, it's just bringing different views to the table is always a good thing to push the progressive agenda forward. Does that Dan? Is that what?
Yeah. I'll comment after everybody has had a chance to go too. But Eddie, to that point, like I was just thinking as you started talking, I was like, what have I missed that I haven't shared about my own experience yet? But like for me, when I went through the application process, I, am a white guy who's grown up in New Hampshire, and I have for a long time been committed to the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion in my job as an educator. But I didn't necessarily know where to begin with that. And so for me, to your point of challenging viewpoints, like learning about my identity, the space I take up, creating space for others, and then being challenged by a group of very strong-willed, passionate progressives across the state of New Hampshire to broaden my scope and my understanding of the world and the way that I take up space in it was a huge impact for me. And it absolutely, not just to Eddie's point about like, merging conservative and progressive ideals, but really figuring out, how your beliefs coincide and, coexist with all of these other, very, very passionate people who are smart, doing the important work, and then challenging you to kind of expand your viewpoints of the world it was an important experience for me. So I can understand why that would matter to you a lot. That was one that I was like thinking of as you started talking. So I'm glad I had a tie in. Sam or Megan, do you want to contribute a little bit?
Oh yeah, and I feel like everyone who's here has in some way been nominated, and I'm sure Dan has or is reaching out to you with a lot of information. So there's one thing that I would suggest is that because there's a lot of components to NLC, which makes it a little difficult to summarize in 1 or 2 sentences. It's just have a conversation with someone who's been through the program, so they can talk about their own experience. And if you personally don't know anyone, just reach out to Dan. I'm sure would love to have a conversation with you, as would Kat. But some things I just wish I had known about the program is, and similar to what Eddie was saying, I really went into it thinking that it was very geared towards people who were in politics and campaigning. Whereas like, especially by now, some people definitely have a background in politics. A lot of people have a background in nonprofits. A lot of people have jobs that are completely unrelated to their personal and their personal values, and they just express those in some capacity outside of that. So it's a very like wide array of people who go into the program, and that's the point. We want to get a very diverse array of people in all terms, especially professionally and in terms of their political viewpoints. And that's one of the things the program hopes to accomplish. If there's one thing I knew about the program before, it would just be that like, I don't have to be like I went into NLC very intimidated by the notion of like a professional development program and thinking I had to be super professional and like buttoned up during it. Or like if I didn't know a lot about the program or something, I should have just like sat down and be quiet and just observed it all and like take it in, as opposed to being like an active participant. And I wish I had just been so much more like open about myself and speaking up than I had been originally, because I really would have gotten, I think, even more out of the program than I did. And it's taken me like a few more years to get to that point.
Awesome, thank you. Megan?
Yeah, I don't really have like a whole lot to add, but I guess one thing that like during my application process and everything was like be willing to be vulnerable, like not only like in your interviews, but also your essays, and just like open and honest, and don't let anxiety make you not do it. You can do it.
That's a pretty awesome way to have a final sentiment there, Megan. I appreciate that in a big way. So folks, everyone on the call, I am going to do my best. You've heard me now to say that I'm a bit of a chatterbox. I'm going to do my best to give a very concise explanation of the life cycle of the application process of NLC, all the way through to if you are accepted as a fellow, through the Institute, and then life after. I'm going to do my best. And then the rest of the time will be for Q&A for each of you. So we start with today. Hopefully all of you are thinking that you're a little bit more persuaded to open up the application and look at some of those application questions. And if you want to talk about the application and submit that, the process is pretty straightforward. Like Megan said, feel free to be open and vulnerable. You do not have to have, the most eloquent essays or, like a resume that, has, Obama's signature under it. If you have those things, awesome. But it really is something that you can start thinking about what it means for you to be a progressive, what you think you have to gain by participating in NLC, and what you think you might have to contribute as a progressive here in New Hampshire. And all of those are things that you can just kind of start mulling over today. And then at some point over the summer, submit. If you choose to submit, you have all the way up until September 3rd. As the recruitment chairs, Kat and I are obviously hoping you'll do that sooner because it will ease our nerves as we see applications rolling in. But that's just on us. Absolutely no pressure for you all. And we're both here and happy to answer any questions that you may have during that application process. Once the application deadline closes on September 3rd, there's a separate set of the board and our alumni who review those applications, and they work then to review and interview candidates all the way up through mid-September and mid-October. And then mid to late October to early November, we let folks know that they've been selected for NLC and they're offered a spot on the fellowship, and you have the opportunity to then choose whether or not you want to participate. The Institute itself does not begin until January, and I'm going to start talking about that part in just a moment, but there are two things I just want to cover about the finances of applying for NLC and the actual payment and coverage of all of that, because it's important for folks to know up front. So in order to apply, there is a $30 application fee. If for any reason finances are a barrier to you, let me or let Kat know. We have never turned anyone away for being unable to pay the application fee. That's something that NLC nationally really prioritizes. And then if you apply and are accepted, we do have a $200 deposit that we ask folks to put down upfront, but it is 100% completely refundable. And that happens after your successful completion of the Institute. So folks who had just finished their 2021 fellowship will be getting their refunds shortly if they haven't already. Kat knows better than I do, but it's coming. And then from there, the reason that we have that $200 refundable deposit is because we want anybody who accepts a seat to make sure that they know they're taking this very seriously. And there is no other cost associated with NLC besides those two elements. And the reason for that is because Kat's class actually spent their entire fellowship fundraising as a component of a pay it forward model to make sure that the fellowship class of 2022 would not have any other costs incurred during their fellowship. And it's a really excellent model that we, pay it forward in the sense that we make sure that the future classes are taken care of and that any excess funds are used to then open new chapters or support progressive movements around the country nationally. And I think that it's really, an awesome model. It's one that we try to do and really prioritize to make sure that we are never using cost as a barrier, but also that folks can participate in what roughly equates to between $1,700 and $2,000 of professional development funding in terms of resources, speakers, materials, and trainings that our curriculum chairs and our state and national committees all organize. And then that brings us kind of to January. So you have applied, you have been accepted, you are about to start on your first weekend. And I'll talk about the weekends themselves in just a moment. But the time commitment is also one that's kind of important that a lot of folks are curious about, because people who tend to be thinking about applying to NLC tend to have a lot of other things going on and are really passionate about being leaders in their community, whatever that might mean. So our time commitment is 1 full weekend per month for 5 months. Sam did mention it's a 6-month institute, and that's correct. But really the first 5 months are intense full weekends. And the last month is a graduation ceremony where we celebrate all of the hard work that you have done. We honor some of the projects that people are beginning to work on and are taking on. And the first 5 months are really intensive thematic training. Everybody kind of mentioned that in January, that first weekend, it is all about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And self-reflection, and people are really getting an opportunity to know their cohort, which is never more than low 20s to mid 20s in size, and never smaller than about 15 to 17 folks. We try and make sure that it's large enough to grow and contribute to meaningful conversation, but small enough to make sure that the cohort can also become really tight-knit and feel comfortable and confident in a safe space to have some pretty difficult and important conversations with one another. And then subsequently, from January, you'll meet once a month for one full weekend, from 8 to 4:30 Saturday and Sunday, learning subsequent thematic skills. One weekend will be about fundraising and finance and campaign management. Another one will be about leading people and managing others. There's another weekend about social media marketing, communications, and public speaking. And it goes along with the flow of having very specific New Hampshire-based conversations about what it is that you need to know to be a progressive leader here in New Hampshire, as well as in 2021, we just for the first time, well, really in 2020, in Megan's class and Eddie's class, we started to incorporate national themes as well, because we had to pivot to being virtual. And I'm summarizing something that Sam spent the last half of the 2 years working on. So Sam, I hope I'm doing an okay job. But long story short is we have now incorporated some national themes as well. So there are opportunities to meet with national sponsors, chapters from around the country, talking not just about hyper-local issues that we're faced with here in New Hampshire, but also these national trends that we need to in order to make sure that we are making movement as a progressive nation. And then there are a couple of other things I just want to make sure I cover about the Institute itself. And then I'll talk about a couple of other elements that don't really take place fully within the Institute, but I think are critical for you to know if you're thinking about applying as it pertains to the commitment of NLC, but also just, I think, are huge benefits for folks who apply and are accepted. So in the Institute, in addition to having the small cohort of people that you're learning about professional development with, the other element is that I think is really important is that you are then developing what we call a capstone project. You'll be asked to think about that over the course of your application. You don't have to know what it will be, but a capstone really stands for this huge project, whether it's personal or professional, that you want to focus on. And then you will use the lessons from each weekend of NLC to build upon and start setting milestones for yourself. And you'll work with your cohort and small groups that we call lead groups to make sure that you are growing and making progress on those goals. And that really can be anything. It spans the gamut. We've had folks who have started gender neutral Frisbee leagues. We have had folks who Kat is working on starting a laundromat lending library for kids' books. I can't remember Sam, Megan, and Eddie's projects off the top of my head. I started a relatively small one, I would say, where I went and did some after-school programming with kids in Rochester middle schools, brought them out to farms to learn about sustainable agriculture. And then it really does get huge in scope and scale. We have folks who have started nonprofits, successfully run for office. We have had folks who have started major activism organizations across the state. The one that I always highlight, some of you may be familiar with, especially on the Seacoast, is the Reproductive Freedom Fund of New Hampshire. That was started by an NLC alum. Her name's Josie Pinto, and she's pretty incredible. I am passionate about Josie's project, partially because she was in my cohort in 2019, and Eddie's partner Emma as well, for that matter. But we did some really incredible work with Josie's project. She knew on day one that not having an abortion fund in the state of New Hampshire was a huge gap that she felt she needed to address and that she was capable of addressing. She also identified really quickly that that was not something that she was going to be able to successfully build, launch, and make sustainable over the course of our 5 months training institute or our 6 months total fellowship. What really it took was 2 years of preparation and training for her, finding the right people, getting sustainable funding in place, and then organizing a successful launch in order to do. But she was able to do that this past year and is now able to provide abortion care for a number of folks every single month through sustainable giving that she's done. And the reason I highlight that, we have a lot of folks who've done a lot of really cool projects, but it's been long-term, is huge in scope and scale, and it pertains to the network that we've built throughout NLC. I do see the chat popping up in the corner, and I'm terrible at multitasking, so I apologize. I will scroll in a moment. But what was really cool is we have an alumni who is, the finance manager for that organization. We have an alumni who is doing most of the social media for that organization. And we have all been super vigilant about what's going on in work like Josie's and folks like her who are doing these huge things like running for office, launching nonprofits. And we serve as a statewide voice for that work. And the other element that I want to cover, in addition to NLC, is the mentorship. And now I know I asked you all to chat about that and to talk about your components. You did a great job, so thank you to the speakers. But just to kind of highlight what that looks like is early on in the Institute, we as a board ask folks what it is that they're looking to succeed in personally and professionally. And we'll already have some idea of that from your application and from the early conversations in the Institute. But we'll start to talk about, who it is that you might want to learn from. Do you want, somebody from a very specific industry? Are you interested in someone from, a different industry that you're looking to pivot to? Do you want someone who's early career, so they're a peer that you can kind of shoot the breeze with about similar problems that you might both be experiencing? Or do you want somebody who's at the end of your career trajectory? And the mentorship experience has also been hugely influential for a number of NLC fellows and alumni. I was very fortunate to get, because I am an educator by trade, but I wanted to move into education policy. And I was very fortunate to be paired with somebody where I said I wanted, a really established ed policy person with the executive director for the New Hampshire School Boards Association. And he met with me regularly and we had lunch every month for 6 months and then pivoted into email. But he's the one who told me to go back for my doctor. He's like, you're not going to do it without some extra work. But he was the one who really guided me in that direction, which I had kind of previously been reluctant to do. He also then has given me a bunch of tips and tricks towards being a more productive ed policy professional. And I've been able to start taking some steps towards that since starting my doctoral program. Another person who I think is an excellent story about mentorship is Natalie LaFlamme, who you may or may not know. She is on the board, so if you do apply and are accepted, you'll almost certainly meet Natalie. She is a wonderful person and the funniest person that you'll meet. So you'll be sure to get to know her very quickly if you're accepted. One of the things that Natalie asked for, she's a lawyer here in New Hampshire who is from New Hampshire, but went away for law school and relocated back. She wanted to know what the life trajectory of somebody in her career would look like. So she specifically asked for somebody who was basically at their retirement in order to learn what that might look like here in New Hampshire. She was paired with an older lawyer in Concord near where she lives. And they have become incredibly good pals. I hesitate to say best friends, but I mean, I think they might be. And they talk weekly, and together, he has been able to help Natalie issue some incredibly prominent legal issues and amicus briefs on to the New Hampshire Supreme Court on constitutional issues in the New Hampshire Constitution that she and he were both challenging around education funding. And so it really is kind of a pick your own adventure. Some people like Eddie, they only needed a couple of emails back and forth to kind of set what their milestones might be. And some folks are totally fine with that. And other folks like Natalie latch on to, what really is a lifelong professional advantageous connection, but also a personal connection that has brought her, I have some pretty incredible work opportunities that she might not have had at her age without that. So that's something I really think is important. I'm trying to think if there's anything one last thing, and then I will open the floor for questions. I promise I'm being as concise as I can, is fundraising. And I know that everybody else has mentioned and touched on fundraising, and I see, Sierra, and you've got a good point. I see it in the chat, I'll touch on it. Is that fundraising is something that a lot of people are uncomfortable with. Long story short is that the reason NLC exists is as a reaction to the decades of funding that the Conservative Party has put into place to develop young professionals around the country. And they have done it incredibly well and strategically. And up until NLC nationally was launched about a decade ago now, less than a decade, but a little while ago, there really wasn't a youth leadership development movement along the progressive side of the political spectrum. And now we are, I don't know if I've said this yet, but we are a nonpartisan organization. We don't align with any political party. Theoretically, you could have Republicans applying for NLC. I don't know if that's happened here in New Hampshire, but we represent a very broad political ideological spectrum. However, we are really invested in making sure that progressive ideals are promoted here in New Hampshire. And with that comes a huge importance on emphasizing fundraising, not just to pay it forward for the class, like I had mentioned earlier, but also to make sure that you are all more well equipped to do that in your own lives. So whether it's me working to make sure that I'm calling folks to fundraise for, certain educational funding issues, or if it's Josie learning to fundraise for her nonprofit. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in that arena. And the fundraising component is something that NLC really emphasizes and trains you up on. So you will learn and practice through the annual NLC fundraiser to pay for subsequent classes, but it is such an essential skill that I was and kind of remain uncomfortable with it. But you have to get comfortable with it if you want to stand for your progressive ideals. And Sierra is probably the #1 advocate for that. I should say Rachel too, but Sierra's been doing it for a long time and has kind of just actually completely crushed fundraising here. She's doing a good job in the state for New Hampshire, and it's something that we're really trying to promote. And we've had a lot of folks with a lot of great success out of that. And if you are similarly, like me, I'll use myself as an example, uncomfortable with that, if you apply and are accepted, lean into it, because there's a reason why we all need to be a little bit better about it. And it's not that hard. And like Megan said, even if you're doing fundraising professionally, you can always be a little bit better at it, a little bit more strategic and a little bit more comfortable. I'm not trying to scare anyone away with that. I hope that's empowering to me. So I hope that that's empowering for you as well. I think that covers most of the big bullets. I want to mention what Sierra noted in the chat, and I don't think I've seen everything, are there plans for us to be in person or virtual for 2022? And we have not received national guidance on that yet. Right now, for 2020, we had to pivot to be virtual, and we pivoted very well. So Megan and Rachel can really speak to what that was like. It was challenging, absolutely, for the fellows and for the board at the time, but I think that they did just about as best as they could given the circumstance, and we stayed virtual in 2021. And Sam, who is the curriculum director, and Rachel and Sierra and Sam's co-director, Sean Locke, did an incredible job making sure that was as engaging as possible. We're very aware of Zoom fatigue. So even though there are some very full weekends during those institutes that I described, we made sure that there were opportunities to step away, and we made sure that there were opportunities for you to engage in conversation and listen to folks and participate in meaningful activities as well. So as much as those can still be long weekends, whether they're in person or virtual, I think that we tried our very best, and I think it's safe to say that Sam and Sean succeeded in making sure that it was really as engaging as it possibly could be, as much so as it was in person. And there's actually an advantage that I don't know, long story short, because we don't have national guidance, if we will be virtual or in person or some hybrid of the two in 2022. But the advantage is we have had this opportunity to now meet with national networks and to meet with sponsors and speakers from around the country who we never had the opportunity to meet with previously. And I think there's a huge value to being hyper local and making sure that our network is one that is strong, but that was an advantage that we had not had in prior years. So I think it was a pretty cool one. And I'm seeing other things in the chat. I'm just trying to make sure there weren't any pressing questions
I
because
think we're all caught up in the chat, Dan. I don't know if you want to reiterate any of it or not, but I think we've been pretty active in there.
Thank you. Thank you. I saw it flowing. I just wasn't, I'm not great at multitasking. So I appreciate Sierra and Rachel. It looks like you stepped in a little bit to reply as well to some of those comments. So I am going to pipe down. We have 25 minutes left before the end of this session, and we can take the rest of it to answer as many questions as you all have. And if you, yeah, I'll pause for a moment, and I'm happy to answer any questions you've got.
Can you just repeat, is it 8:30 to 4:30 on Saturday and Sunday?
Yeah, Henny, it is roughly 8:30 to 4:30 every Saturday and Sunday. We ask folks to commit to that. You know, it's not always that full day, and there are sometimes breaks in between, but we ask folks to make that commitment.
And do you happen to know what weekend of the month?
No, we don't. But I would say that if you have like 1 or 2 weekends a month where you know you tend to have commitments, still apply. And here's why: because we will have that scheduled by November. So you will have the opportunity to make an informed decision before you need to make any kind of commitment to that down payment. That I should say deposit, not down payment. But you'll have the opportunity to make an informed decision then. And I wouldn't want you to have that attendance be the reason you don't apply. The other thing is, like, let's say there was one weekend that really was a conflict and you get that information in November. We really do take attendance very seriously because it's condensed and it's intense from week to week, I should say month to month. But if there's one weekend that you absolutely cannot attend, we have chapters in Vermont and chapters in Boston, and we have had people go to other chapters to attend that because they're the same thematic weekends each month. So you can make up a missed New Hampshire weekend by going to Vermont or Boston for the day or for the weekend. And that's not uncommon. We've had people from Boston come up to us as well. And that's totally possible.
Thank you.
Yep.
This is somewhat piggybacking off of that. So I'm a church employee, which I realize is a strange thing to say in a Zoom room of progressives. Maybe not, but that's kind of like a non-negotiable for me. Is there any room for that? Or because I'm hearing over and over like it's very strict, and that would be, you know, not strange at all. Thank you. I just thoughts on that would appreciate, because it would take me out. It's my job, so.
Yeah, Maggie, that's a great question. So long story short, it's not actually that unusual to have. We have a huge interfaith community in NLC. I think that Sierra and Rachel tallied up the number of faiths represented in this past cohort. And I think that there were like something like 12 different active faiths being practiced in a cohort of like 20 folks. So no, not uncommon, but I do understand your scheduling conflict. You know, I think that again, I would not let that prevent you from applying, but it is a challenge that, you know, you would need to overcome with, you know, the curriculum chairs at the time. So Sam is stepping down, and we'll have another curriculum chair stepping in with Sean Locke, who is consistent. He's not here today, but he was here last year. So between the curriculum chairs and Sierra and Rachel, if you're accepted, I would stand to bet there would be some wiggle room to, you know, make that work for the right candidate. And, you know, I wouldn't want that to prevent you from applying. Sierra and Rachel, if you want to chime in, you certainly can. It would be tricky, but I think there's probably workarounds. And if you don't want to, Sierra and Rachel, that's okay too.
I don't know if I have any sort of an answer, and probably better to talk like just a couple of us offline, but yeah, I don't know if I have a distinct answer at this current moment.
It's a great
We can
question.
definitely kind of discuss that with national folks, and I'm sure other chapters have had that experience, so we can get back to you on that too, for sure.
Yeah, it's like the day of the show for my work.
Exactly, yeah. Exactly.
Can't really move it, so thank you.
What I will do, Maggie, for you is I'll make sure to email our national recruitment directors and get some kind of response, because like Rachel said, you are certainly not in a silo. And there are other faith leaders who have participated in NLC in the past, and we can figure out an answer and go from there, okay?
Thank you.
So if you see me scribbling and all, that's what I'm taking notes. What else? What other questions do folks have?
Hello. I was just curious. You were discussing the fundraising portion. Love that. I'm very, very excited for that opportunity. I just wanted to clarify. You said that the funds would go towards the following class, and then once those costs were allocated, they would be sent to the national organization, and then from there, they're kind of dispensed to other like-minded, or you know what I mean, other organizations, et cetera. Do we know where those get to go, or do we get to decide where those go?
I can address that.
Yeah.
So they don't go to other organizations. Our national organization, we have 50 chapters, and some of the chapters are more experienced, have been around longer, have fundraising a little bit more under control than other chapters. So what the national organization does is all of the funds are pooled in one account nationally. And newer chapters, like chapters that have only been around for 1 or 2 years, don't have a full board, have just run their first institute, who just have less of a network or no network at all, they get our support until they're ready to stand on their own, so that we have a full network of 50 chapters around the country who are all able to do the work that we do. With that being said, chapters who do a really good job fundraising, like us, we get a larger budget each year programmatically. So it's equitable in that way, but it's also nice for us to be able to do what we do a good job at and help support other folks around the country who are, like one example that I can think of just off the top of my head right now is the fact that we're even able to talk about being able to do things in person at some point here in New Hampshire, whereas some of our other chapters, Louisiana, Alabama, like they're at like a 10 or 20% vaccination rate. So like that's not even probably on the table for them. I would love to be able to help support chapters in different situations like that around the country. So that's where anything that doesn't go back to New Hampshire would go to other NLC chapters. Does that fully answer the question, or was there another part?
Yeah, I was just like, I was just truly concerned. I was like, oh my God, is this a cult? Like, is this going to become like a multi-level marketing scheme? And I was just trying to fact check there, if I'm being completely honest. So great answer. I really appreciate it.
And I just want to add something too to that. And I'm sorry if you already said this, Dan, and I was kind of in and out of the call here. But another piece of fundraising is that, we're all volunteers on the board, but we do have some permanent staff nationally that obviously make the organization run. And something that's really important in the progressive organization is to provide, good wages and paid family leave and benefits and things. And so obviously some of the money in that national pool goes to those folks who are permanent staff. We're just all volunteers. But that's there's other expenses like that.
I didn't mention that, Rachel, and you and Ciaran both touched on really good points. I'm glad we're not an MLM. And Julia, I'm glad you asked the question. I also just want to note, so as a volunteer organization at each state level, we don't actually manage those funds. They all go directly back to the national organization, who then distributes them back to each state chapter. So because we have a small staff that supports the entire national organization. So our funds go to the national organization and then are distributed back to New Hampshire. And then, like Ciaran said, it's not, I think I misspoke, Julia. So very fair question. We are not dedicating ourselves to like organizations or or for that matter, as a nonpartisan organization, we are not donating to specific politicians or to specific, issues-based campaigning we are specifically here to develop, progressive young leaders across the country. So all of that funding goes back to our chapters or to establishing new ones across the country. That might be about as cultish as we get. What else? Does anybody have any other questions?
Robbie has his hand
Robbie
up.
has a question.
Yeah, I was just wondering, aside from that full weekend, the 8 to 4:30 or 8:30 to 4:30, can you tell us about what the commitment level is like for maybe pre-work or post-work, or if there is any?
Sure, that's a great question. So we don't have pre-work before the Institute that you need to prepare for. The Institute begins in January and you're expected to come in kind of, just ready to learn at that point. Throughout the months of the Institute, though, there are some other time commitments. The fundraiser will start by taking place during an Institute weekend where you receive training. But from there, you'll be expected to attend some structured fundraising times throughout the course of the Institute, but not during the weekends. And those tend to take place, in the evenings on Zoom. So you're not traveling again to, if we are in person, to Manchester or Concord, you're just signing onto a Zoom call and then pretty quickly putting yourself on mute there and calling, your network or our alumni and our past donors. And that's not a huge time commitment, honestly. It's maybe like 5 or 6 hours over the course of the 5 to 6 month Institute, a couple of hours at a time, to help us reach that fundraising goal. New Hampshire has historically had a really strong fundraiser, and we've received some grants and are doing pretty well, but that's one time commitment. And the only other one that really happens during the Institute is meeting with that smaller group that I really only touched on, called a lead group. And that tends to be a group of 3 or 4 of the fellows who are meeting with you. We used to organize them geographically. So there would be like a Seacoast group, a Manchester group, a Concord group, and they would try and meet up that way. It's a little different now that we've been virtual, but the intent is that you will get to know those peers a little bit better. As you start thinking about your capstone, you'll have an opportunity to talk a bit more about what your idea is, flesh it out. Folks will poke holes in it, absolutely, and give you ideas to think on what you might need to improve to be ready to be successful in that venture. But that's also kind of a pick your own adventure in times the time commitment. That would maybe also be only like another 3 to 4 hours over the course of the entire Institute. When we met in person, a lot of times it was to meet for like happy hour and an appetizer to talk about that kind of thing. And over the course of Zoom calls, it's, still kind of, bring your beverage of choice and, eat dinner and talk about things that you're passionate about and thinking about.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, and one last thing is when you start meeting with your mentor, that can take some time, but that doesn't actually take place during the Institute. That we typically pair mentors and mentees together at the end of the Institute, right around May or June. And you can decide how much time you want to spend with that mentor. And I see Maggie and Amy with your hand raised. So polite, you all.
Let me put that down so I'm more polite. There we go. Dan, you mentioned that if we were in person, we'd be in Manchester or Concord. Is that something that's determined by who?
We've always been in Concord when we've been in person. And I don't necessarily think that is a solid rule. But Sam took himself off mute, so he may have something to say. But long story short is we try and pick a central location for the fellows. So, knowing that it is more challenging for folks from rural communities in the north and the west to make their ways to the seacoast, or vice versa, to make you drive out to Eddie and Peterborough. Those are the kinds of things that we keep in mind. And Sam, I don't know if you wanted to chime in there.
Yeah, I was going to say, basically, we as a local board always figure out a place, and we tend to try to switch it up between different nonprofit organizations. And it's always been just based on where the cluster fellows for that particular cohort is. And in past years, it has been kind of centered around Concord, Manchester, Nashua. So that's what we've done. But in the past years, we've actually had a lot more people from other regions, including the Seacoast. So we are not, I would say, married to the Concord Manchester line by any means.
Thanks, Sam.
I think it is just tough though, because if people are coming from the seacoast and then somebody lives in Lebanon, Hanover, Keene, like where's the center going to be, at Concord or Manchester? So we're a little bit limited in that way, just to make it equitable and, you know, all of that. But I think just to say one quick little thing is that now that we have Zoom down, like we can do this all on Zoom. Like we talked about in the chat, we don't know the state of the pandemic for next year yet. I can't make any promises about variants and vaccines and all of these other things that I just don't have the control over. But I do think that we have a little bit more flexibility because we also have such good access to our online resources now and being able to do things on Zoom too. So if there's ever a conflict, you know, about driving or just anything like that, like those are all things we can discuss during the selections process. We might know more by then, and you know, we've all been lived through the last year and a half. We might not know more by then. So your patience is appreciated, but we have high hopes that someday we will be able to see everybody.
You know, I think that regarding location of meetings and the advantage of some of the virtual things we've done, we've actually had a lot of folks who are parents to young kids recently start indicating interest in applying and have nervousness around how they would be able to, you know, provide childcare. We actually have some really awesome connections who have offered to offer childcare for participants if we were in person in Concord, Manchester recently, which is awesome. But we also, you know, through Zoom have been able to really have advantages for folks who just physically couldn't step away from their life for a full day. Still is a challenge, but it's definitely made it more manageable for folks with those other kinds of obligations, which has been kind of excellent.
So there's a chance that if you do meet in person in Manchester, but somebody is not able to make that drive, that that person could just dial into Zoom to be with the group that way?
I think that there's a chance. I mean, Robbie, we're kind of that's a great question. We're kind of existing in this like I might not use this term, like a liminal space, like where anything could happen because of the nature of the pandemic. I think that that's a possibility, but we also haven't encountered it because we went from fully in person without Zoom as an option to fully virtual without meeting in person as an option. So what you're suggesting as like a hybrid model is a very cool one. Sierra and I both work in online education. So like I'm personally vested in that idea, but I don't think that we have made a decision on whether or not that could happen yet.
I think something that would be more likely would be like we would do hybrid where we would all be there one day and then we would all be remote the other day. So something like that is probably more likely if we were to go that route. But again, I can't estimate what the world will look like in 6 months or one day at this point.
But I think it's an awesome idea, Robbie. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, we'll be figuring out a lot this year as well. You know, hopefully the world, like Sierra is saying, will return to some sense of normal. But I also think that, you know, the investment in engaging in new technology and how that's enabling people to participate has been exciting. So I imagine we'll keep learning through that over the next year. Oh, Julia, if you look, do you have a question? Oh, Henny, you do.
Wait, sorry. I'm so sorry. You go.
You go ahead. It's fine. It's fine. Okay. Can you tell me the makeup of your last couple of cohorts? I just don't want to be. I'm trying my best not to be the only Black person in the cohort. I understand just the nature of the beast. I just rather come in prepared for that. And so you can just talk about the makeups to your last cohorts.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, Henny. So Sierra and Rachel specifically have focused on recruiting diverse population of candidates every single year. We've tried to make a real effort in recruiting specifically the BIPOC community. And I think that we have had at least a few people of color in every single cohort for the last few years. I'm trying to think of, I don't think there's been any cohort in recent years where we have not.
We've had our cohort makeup has been, I don't really can't say like percentages or anything like that, but certainly typically more than like just a handful of BIPOC folks.
Yeah.
We really, I mean, that's really a big goal for us. Yeah.
I just know, again, if it's gonna happen, I'd rather it be said early on.
Totally. Yeah.
For it.
It's
But
something.
I just understand it is the nature of the beast living in New Hampshire. So I understand. That's the reason I just want to ask that question. I hope it didn't come off across the wrong.
No,
It didn't. It's appreciated.
One cool thing though too is like, even if I don't even want to say that, but like there's an alumni network in New Hampshire, right? We have over 100 alumni, and a lot of our alumni are not white, which is great. It's something that we're actually really proud of. And those are all folks that you would be able to like, you know, hang out with and get to know and participate in being community with as well.
Yeah.
So that's another benefit.
Yeah, and I just want to piggyback off of Sierra because it's not crass. It's an awesome question to ask. We like Sierra, and I don't have percentages off the top of my head, but we have been actively recruiting and prioritizing recruiting from those communities, and we've been very fortunate in making it a priority that we have not had like we probably have had majority white because of the state of New Hampshire, but we have not had like a issue where somebody has been the only person of color in a room. I think at least in quite some time, not since I think Sierra has been involved with the organization anyway. And
I don't think ever since our inception in 2015 has there only been one person of color. I think we've done a really good job with that.
And it also leads me to it's a good point to talk about like how we view diversity as an organization, because we prioritize recruiting not just communities of color, but we also strongly have been trying to recruit from the LGBT plus community. We have been trying to look at accessibility and ableism in
neurodivergent.
What was that, Eddie?
Neurodivergent
community. Thank you. Yeah. And so we are really trying to bring forth like the fact that diversity has many lenses, and that we can and should prioritize building cohorts that represent multiple lenses of that. And that goes to Maggie's point too about the interfaith community. We have a lot of big faith leaders here in the state who have participated in NLC, which is been a huge boost for that community, and we've been really proud of that, just like we have been with the BIPOC community and with the LGBT community too. So if there is an area that we have missed, what has been really excellent is that our fellows tend to bring that to light in 1 year, from year to year. And while I think we have been very strong in some areas, we've also broadened our horizons quite a bit. So to Eddie's point about the neurodivergent community, and issues of like disability and accessibility, we have been much more proactive in learning about those communities because our fellows have prompted us to do that. And they also are prompting us to recruit more heavily from the BIPOC and the LGBT community as well. It's something that is shared across the board, certainly across the network, not just amongst the board.
Thank you.
Yeah. What other questions do we have? We've got a couple more minutes. I'm not trying to rush out the door though. Julia, you looked like you had a question. I'm not trying to put you on the spot. If you're okay, that's fine. Okay. I kind of want to know what it was, but we can talk later. Robbie, do you have...
Sorry if you said this already, but roughly how big is the cohort?
We usually have at least 17. So I think our smallest cohort has ever been around like 15 to 17, and we try not to have more than mid-20s. We want to make sure that we have an organization that is small enough that folks can have 15 to 20. We've gone slightly over. I don't think we've ever gone below 15, but the idea is that we have a small enough cohort of folks that can have those really sincere and serious conversations with one another to challenge and grow, but that it's big enough that we also represent the kind of diversity that I was just talking about.
And how big is the pool of applicants for that 15 to 20?
It's different every year. We usually shoot for as many applicants as we can, and we usually hit around 40 applicants. That's been historically true. I think that this year we may have a few more because we've been really active in recruiting for a little bit longer than normal, but I wouldn't suggest that we're going to have 100 this year. If we do, I apologize, but it's also a good problem for for us to have.
Thank you.
Yeah. Julie, I saw you come off mute again. I'm sorry. Did you want to share? I apologize. Okay, okay. All right, it's 8 o'clock. I am more than happy to stay on the call as long as you all need me to, but I don't want to keep anybody longer than they need to be here. So if folks want to stay on to keep asking me questions, feel free to, but I want to just first give a big round of thanks to Megan and Sam and to Eddie. I appreciate all three of you so much to being here today. Like huge, huge kudos to all three of you for carving out your Monday nights. Very much appreciated. And hopefully we'll see you at future events, of course. And for folks who may be just about to hop off the call, if you don't have questions, you now have my email. You definitely have my cell phone number. I've been bugging folks a bunch. Hopefully it's appreciated because you're all here today, and you feel free to just get in touch however you need to, whenever you need to, before the application process, of course, but also afterwards. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm always happy to meet and talk with new progressives. And Kat will be taking over a bulk of the recruitment work in the next couple of weeks, but I'm really excited to transition her over. She's like more than ready. And we will be working really closely together while that process takes place. So I know she's excited to work with and talk with each of you too. All right. Well, if anybody has to hop, that's fine. I'm going to stop the recording.